After going through the contents of Module 1 and Module 2, I'm sure you are in a position to appreciate the importance of making our cities safe, accessible, and inclusive. So, the purpose of this course is to provide you with necessary guidance, and this module, that's the Module 3, is the most vital module. This will explain the working mechanism of the ICF in order to operationalize the national commitment of making our cities inclusive. There was a felt necessity for a robust methodology which will help in one, sector-wise assessment of the existing cities in terms of safety, accessibility, and inclusivity, and two, planning for safe, accessible, and inclusive greenfield cities. Under the Building Accessible, Safe, and Inclusive Indian Cities basic program, National Institute of Urban Affairs collaborated with its strategic partner IIT Kharagpur to prepare the Inclusive City Framework, which was formally launched on the 2nd of December 2021, that is the eve of World Disability Day, by our former Housing Secretary.
The objectives of ICF are to conduct safety, accessibility, and inclusivity assessment in a city with reference to the suggested 23 ICF components under 6 sectors. Second, to provide inclusivity score or what we calling star rating to cities based on the audit done. Third is to propose sustainable and user-centric guidelines based on the available planning standards. Fourth, to ensure engagement of all stakeholders and beneficiaries. And finally, to finalize a future pathway in terms of planning, implementation, and review to serve the purpose of inclusivity. So we have proposed a 5-step approach towards an inclusive city, starting with audit, scoring of indicators, leading to star rating, recommendations, engagement of stakeholders and target groups, and a robust and sustainable methodology for implementation, monitoring, and review. Now, if you go through the framework, you would see a huge section of this framework comprise a checklist for strategic accessibility analysis. 6 sectors have been identified after exhaustive review of global and national guidelines and best practices, under which 23 components exist. Now, for realistic assessments, coding is required. Hence, we need measurable parameters or indicators. The framework has total 196 indicators under these 6 sectors. The USP of this framework is consideration of indicators which provide physical, social, economic, and digital inclusion. For example, we already mentioned that in housing we have talked about supportive mechanism to vulnerable group for home ownership. Section on urban infrastructure considered feedback mechanism and sensitization. Providing tailor-made employment opportunities and sensitive HR policies have been included in the checklist. Transportation sector talks of accessible endpoint connectivity as well as sensitization of drivers and helpers. Optimum level of digitization which can be truly inclusive has been stressed upon, along with accessible tourism and recreation opportunities. Now, to show you the glimpses of few indicators, the first sector on housing, physical and social infrastructure includes aspects like number of accessible units in mass housing, availability of accessible wash for informal residences, accessible healthcare and education, and also location of these accessible facilities and their city level accessibility. We are stressing upon seamless accessibility in cities to make the entire city accessible. Please remember that. The second sector on outdoor environment highlights on availability of accessible footpaths, wayfinding measures in public places, visual as well as auditory, illumination level, safety. The third sector on livelihood stresses upon availability of a range of flexible options for employing people from all vulnerable groups. Availability of special schemes like school to work transition programs for vulnerable groups. This has been quite successful in Singapore, this school to work transition program. And if you remember that in one of the earlier models, we have talked about, the loop whereby if their condition is not improved, if they are not empowered, the condition of the vulnerable group, we do not get true inclusion. We cannot achieve true inclusion. Now, the fourth sector is about urban mobility and public transport. And importance is given on connecting all areas and services by accessible bus service. We need low floor buses, we need accessible bus stops, but also the bus service, like the frequency of bus and how all the areas of the remote areas of the cities are connected. That is also important. So when we are thinking about accessibility at a city level, these provisions are very important. Seamless accessibility, the concept of seamless accessibility, I repeat. Now, again, under this, whether the land use plan or the master plan of the city is integrated with the railway metro lines so that the major areas are within coverage. We are providing accessible housing, but if accessible housing is not connected with accessible transportation system, then our task is incomplete. We are unable to reach out to the target group. Whether human assistance is available or not at terminals, at major stops, within all vehicles. The fifth sector is on IT connectivity, digitization, governance and citizens' participation. And a prominent indicator is whether the website of the urban local body has a mobile app version which is accessible and it connects to accessible facilities and services offered by the various agencies. That whether people living in the city who require accessible services, they are made aware that what are the services available and how they can access them. Otherwise, just giving services is not good enough. You have to tell people that these are the things available. Whether the city has an advisory forum for accessibility and inclusion with representatives from vulnerable groups is also a major consideration, and we have included that in the list of indicator. The last and the sixth sector is on recreation and tourism, which not only stresses upon having accessible recreational places, but again on accessible information and sensitive guides, maybe a pool of local youth who can act as tour guides. It is a win-win situation where they also get employment as well as they help the people with belonging to the vulnerable group in accessing these tourism places.
So here we are. The raw data collection is over by using the checklist. Next is transforming them and compiling them for sector-wise scoring, leading to overall star rating. Now, 4 types of responses will be received from the checklist. Some will be in the form of percentage, like what percentage of city bus stops are accessible, or as ratio, like length of accessible footpath versus total length of footpath available in a city. It could also be binary. Binary refers to yes, no, like whether the ULB has a special cell for inclusion, either yes or no. Certain expressions are qualitative, like affordability of metro rail, reliability of paratransit services, sense of safety in public places. Now, for your convenience and easy understanding, we have mentioned in the checklist itself what type of response you could expect from which indicator. So next is scoring. We have 4 types of responses which we need to convert into a singleton. So this is how you can do it. Convert all into 1 to 5 score. Next step is calculating the cumulative score. A city can get a maximum 5 and a minimum of 0 against each indicator. So for first sector, where there are 67 indicators, the maximum score that a city can achieve is 67 cross 5, which is 335. But it might be such that certain indicators are not applicable for your city. Take for example of sector 3 on urban mobility and public transport. Your city might not have a metro rail at all. In this case, the total number of indicators will be 29 instead of 40. And the maximum score will be 145. Likewise, the total score will also be not 980. Now, once you have calculated the total score for each sector, you need to compute the overall score of the city, which is just adding up the scores. Then the final step is a star rating exercise. Considering the maximum achievable value of A for a city, the lower limits for each star are kept as 90% of A for 5 star, 80% of A as 4 star, 70% of A as 3 star, and 60% of A as 2 star. We have proposed a system for classification as well. Cities getting a cumulative score of more than 70% will be called lighthouse cities, since they are in an advanced stage of inclusion, and between 50 to 70% they would be considered partially accessible, requiring axillary support. The inclusive city will not only be helpful in improving the credibility among its citizens, a higher score will definitely improve the city's livability index and support in fulfilling the mandates of the Rights of Persons with Disability Act.
So coming to the various steps in the process of preparation of ICP, once we are done with the assessment. Next steps are preparation of plan based on the city specific targets. At this stage, the most important task is to integrate the proposals with the existing plans. Like a city will have a land use plan, it will have a mobility improvement plan, because there might be some already proposed developmental schemes which can be slightly modified to integrate provisions for inclusion at an early stage. You not always need to start from scratch. So please review the existing plans and see that how you can make them better and more inclusive. Next stage is project identification and prioritization. So how do we do that? Based on priorities, ground situations and fund availability. Like we have talked about a kind of priority matrix which may be formed, in which a combination of high priority, low current score and low resource requirement will be shortlisted for immediate action, and a combination of low to medium priority, low current score and high resource requirement will be marked as a long-term action. So there should be proper monitoring and feedback that should include in-house and third-party audit. Representatives from the target group are to be included in the review process. The ICF suggests formation of an advisory board at the district level and an inclusive city cell within the urban local body, looking after the nitty-gritties of implementation. Regarding financing, it is recommended that inclusion should be a cross-cutting principle for all municipal activities, and ULBs must have dedicated budgetary allocation for planning and implementation projects and programs for the vulnerable groups. So these are the financing guidelines. So this module gives you an idea of the working of the framework, and as you just saw in the flow chart, that a significant part of the task is referring to guidelines and standards. So the next module will introduce you to sector-specific guidelines and relevant documents for further reference. That is the module 4 and the last module.